Hello, and welcome back to our next unit on a new data type, lists. If our past unit was on some basic data types like strings, integers, and floats, a list is a new data type that is a little more complex. A list is a collection of elements that are organized in a specific order. In some programming languages, lists may be called arrays. Python uses square brackets to indicate a list. Individual elements inside the list are separated by commas. So here we can see a list with the integers 1, 2, 3, and 4 inside of it. Let's create a list of topics to study and have Python print the list. It will print its representation of the list, square brackets and all. So let's see, we'll define a variable topics, and I will make it a list by using square brackets. And inside, let's put some strings. We'll put physics. Oh, let me spell it right. We'll put computer science. We'll put algebra. And let's throw in art. So there's a list of 1, 2, 3, 4 topics that we could study. And now let's just print our list, print topics. And so if we run this, we see we get the square brackets and all, right? So we get the square brackets, and we can see that the element that we put in here, the first element, is a string because it's inside of quotations. However, if we call the type function, we see that Python treats lists as their own class or data type. So let's print the type function and let's pass topics. So let's see. If we run this now, we print the list, and we see that our list topics is a new data type. It's a class, and it's a list. Just like strings had their own methods, lists have their own methods too. Lists have a specific order. So our list topics is very different than, let's say we define a new list, topics 2, and we make this topics list algebra, physics, art, and computer science. Even though these two lists have the same exact elements, if we print topics 2 and we run this, we see that the order of the elements is different. And this is going to make a big difference when we discuss what lists actually are. Now we can access any element inside a list by referencing the index of the specific element. To do this, we reference the list and then put square brackets. So for instance, let's say I want to print the first element in my list topics. So I reference the list topics, and now I put the index of the element in square brackets. Now in both of our lists there's 4 elements. However, the indices run from 0 to 3. It's important to note that the first element of any list starts at index 0. So this is index 0, index 1, index 2, and index 3. So if I want to print the first element in my list topics, I reference the list topics, and now I use square brackets and pass the index that I want to print, index 0. And if I want to do something similar to my list topics 2, I'll reference the list and pass the index of index 0. So if we run this now, we see that, hey, in our first list topics, the first element at index 0 is physics, and our second list topics 2, the first element at index 0 is algebra. So these are in fact different lists. We can also pass a specific element to a function as an argument using indexing. So for instance, we've seen that we can pass the print function an individual element, like topics. Let's say we want to print art. So this would be at index 0, 1, 2, 3. And so this should print art here. Oh, name topic is not defined. We have to be careful. My list is called topics. So I'll run this. And we print art. Very good. But we can also maybe use the type function. So let's call print, and we're going to pass it the type function. And I want to determine the type of, not the individual list topics, but I want to determine the type of the element at index 3. So now when I run this, let's take a moment and try to think about what this is going to do. We're accessing the element at index 3 of the list topics, which is art. We're calling the type function on that, which is a string, and it should print the results. So it should say that this is a string. And right here we get that, right? We get that string representation, exactly what we expect. Now, we have defined lists of strings, but we can also have lists of integers, floats, or a mixture of data types. We can even have nested lists, which is a list of a list. We should note that there's a special syntax to access the last element of a list. The last element can always be accessed using an index of -1. So let's say if I want to print, let's use our second list, topics 2, square brackets, and if I pass it an index of -1, it will print the last element of the list. If I passed it an index of -2, it would print the second to last element. -3 would be the third to last element. So if I run this, we should print computer science, and we do right here. Now, when accessing elements from a list using indexing, we can then work with the value just like you would with a regular variable. For example, let's call a print statement and let's print a message. We'll say, my favorite area of study is, and now let's print computer science. So we're going to do topics, the name of our list. We want to access computer science. So this is index 0, this is index 1. So I'll use indexing, square brackets 1. And let's make it all uppercase. We want to yell this to the world that we love computer science. And so if we run this here, we should be accessing that element nicely and calling a string method because we have a string right there. This will conclude our introductory look on lists. I hope you enjoyed.